Welcome to the Albany Book Festival online, presented by the New York State Writers Institute at the University at Albany. You can learn more about the festival and find direct links to independent booksellers at our festival webpage, albanybookfestival.com. Follow us on social media and hear from more videos from the Writers Institute.
Welcome to the 4th Annual Albany Book Festival here at the University at Albany. I'm Mark Koplik, Assistant Director of the New York State Writers Institute. Thank you so much for coming. It's a delight to share this festival with living, breathing human beings. On behalf of the Writers Institute, I want you to know how grateful we are that you are here. We're grateful to UAlbany Foundation, and our donors for making this event possible. We're also incredibly grateful to the many writers who have come to this festival to make a personal connection with you. Toward the end of this session, we'll be taking questions from the audience. We do ask that you project, be loud, and we also ask our speakers to restate and amplify questions just so that everyone can hear them, and also because the audio feeds into a recording that we're doing of the event, so I appreciate that. We ask that you keep your masks on. Speakers are allowed, if they choose, to remove their masks while they speak, if they remain socially distanced. Books are offered for sale in the Fireside Lounge outside this hall. Immediately after this event, our guests will sign books out in the lounge, and you'll get a chance to chat with Elizabeth Brundage. Masks need to stay on, of course. I'll be passing the leadership of this event over to Ray Muhlstock, who is a frequent collaborator with us on many different events. She is a professor in the Writing and Critical Inquiry Department here at the university, and she also is the director of the WCI Film Festival, which is a fantastic festival. This year's edition will be about vampires. The guest of honor will be Jewel Gomez, one wonderful writer, and that will be October 21st through 24th in the Campus Center Ballroom. So now that you've oriented yourself to the geography of this building, you know where the Campus Center Ballroom is, and you'll be able to find your way there. And it's free and open to the public. Yes. Okay. So without further ado, Ray Muhlstock.
Okay. I just have to say that we have the best shoes today at the event. You have to notice this.
We'll see. We'll give you a little fashion show on the way out. You can all hear me okay? Great. Elizabeth Brundage is the author of 5 novels, including her most recent, Vanishing Point, as well as All Things Cease to Appear, which was a WSJ Best Mystery of 2016, and the basis for the Netflix film Things Heard and Seen, starring Amanda Seyfried, James Norton, and Ray Seahorn. She is a graduate of the Iowa Writers Workshop, where she received a James Michener Award and attended the American Film Institute in Los Angeles. In addition to her novels, her nonfiction writing has appeared in the New York Times Book Review, Witness, New Letters, Greensboro Review, and elsewhere. She has taught at several colleges and universities and lives with her family right here in Albany, New York. Elizabeth, it's a pleasure to speak with you today about Vanishing Point, which was hailed by the Today Show, one of my favorite morning shows, as one of the 5 books to read this past summer. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
It's really nice to be here with you.
To know you. Thank you all for coming. It's good to see so many faces that I recognize out there. Appreciate your coming.
Great. Elizabeth, as a student and writer of film as well as fiction, your novels seem particularly motivated by visual art, painting in quite a few of your novels and photography in this most recent novel. Where do you see the similarities and differences between the art forms, the visual and the verbal, and how can they motivate each other in your novels?
I think I'm really influenced by art in general. In this particular novel, I really wanted to address photography as a way of looking at where we're at kind of as a society and how photographers see. How many of you out there actually love photography and take pictures? I'm sure so many of you. And what is it about it that interests us so much when we hold up our iPhones and we're trying to capture something that, you know, interests us and that has meaning. And so I sort of wanted to look at that in terms of this novel with photography. But art, I'm a huge fan of art, and in All Things Cease to Appear, I use the Hudson River School painters as a way to venture into the spirituality of the time in relation to a story about ghosts. So it was sort of a way for me to intellectually ask questions about life and death and the afterlife. So that's how I did it with that. But
great. And those questions seem to continue in Vanishing Point. Each of your characters goes through a sort of figurative death and rebirth. Where does art play into that idea of death, of rebirth, of letting go of the past in order to move into a new future?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think that in terms of photography, in terms of the Vanishing Point, there were a few things that I was thinking about. The title, I think, alludes to a few ideas about where we're at in our lives and where the characters in this novel are. How close are they to vanishing? Life is so complicated these days, and I think that I sort of wanted to look at that. You look at a snapshot of yourself from your past and reflect on it. It's kind of a dead thing because that doesn't exist anymore, and you consider where you are right now, and how would the photograph be different, and what does it say, and sort of thinking about those questions in relation to these three characters, two men and one woman who meet at an exclusive photography workshop in pursuit of their brilliant careers, and how their lives change and over time, sort of how photographs capture the different essences of who we are at different times in our lives. Does that make sense? I don't know if I answered the question, but something to that degree.
Yeah, absolutely. In the novel, photography facilitates connection and isolation, and each of those things seems to manifest in the art and the method of art of each of those three characters. For instance, portraits taken by Rai, or slice of life shots by Magda, the sort of barren urban landscapes of Julian. Can you speak a little bit about how the art of the characters reflects their personality or situations or philosophies on a larger scale?
Yeah, definitely. In the novel, the first character we meet is Julian Ladd, and he's kind of an interesting guy. He's not really what he seems at first. And he is attracted to empty landscapes because they sort of, I think, echo who he is. He's sort of searching for meaning in his life. He grapples with it. He can't quite capture it. Whereas for Rai Adler, the other male photographer, he takes pictures of people, and he believes photography is a reflection of who we are as individuals. Whereas Magda takes pictures of the events that we find meaning in: weddings, baby christenings, bar and bat mitzvahs, things like that. And so her perspective is completely different. So I think if you read the novel, you'll see how their work really genuinely reflects their deeper personalities.
Yeah, wonderful. You mentioned in the acknowledgments for Vanishing Point, and you've mentioned in some of your previous answers, that photography for you is an apt metaphor for change. But no matter where these characters go after they pack up their cameras, they keep returning to these photographs, these crystallized moments. How do you see that return as part of these narratives of change that each of the characters undergo?
I think, I was so interested in this idea of when we start out as young people with these dreams, and what happens over time, how life sort of chips away at your aspirations or your dreams of becoming whatever. And is that even a real thing? The dreams that we invent, are they even real? Are they even sort of possible? And when you look at other people who attain certain things and you think, oh, I wish I had that, or, if only I could have that. And then those people who have those things are wanting other things. So these are sort of ideas I was playing with in the novel, within the context of this other kind of noir thriller story about these two men who are rivals, and are both in love with the same woman. So in my work, I tend to kind of take a very strong story thread on which to build a world where the characters are functioning or not functioning, but are getting through. And so, yes, they're sort of built on this thriller architecture, but that's not really what interests me as a novelist. I'm interested in really looking at behavior and who we are and asking these larger questions, I think, that we all ask from time to time, and kind of reflecting on, where for the characters, they reflect, they were here at the beginning with these fresh, wild ideas, and the world seemed genuinely just wild with possibility. And then moving through life and the things that happen to us as people, just circumstantially, that affect us and change us and make us evolve or make us into different people. And so when Magda and Rai come together after not seeing each other for 20 years, they're reflecting on that. They're looking back, and they also have to look forward for other reasons. So I think photography is like that. It's a way, when we look at pictures of where we've been as a species, it's sort of interesting to evaluate that. And then we look at who we are now. It's important to reflect. And I think photographers do that brilliantly, not only journalists, but art photographers who just take pictures of faces, to look at a face, to really reckon with another individual, to really look at somebody. That's something I was just kind of playing with the character of Julian, who looks out and sees these empty spaces. He's attracted to that sort of loneliness because it's a kind of reflection of who he is. That's just, it's really interesting to use photography as a metaphor for all of those things to explore.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And the fact that they come together around this photography workshop maybe deepens that connection to the art itself.
I think, it's interesting. I was interested in watching how they begin and how they evolve as artists and also as people, and how their lives change over time. So,
I want to ask you a little bit about genre. So your last novel, All Things Cease to Appear, is a modern Hudson Valley Gothic. Part ghost story, part murder mystery, part domestic drama. Vanishing Point is classified as a literary thriller. You mentioned a few things of the archetypes of that genre in your previous answer. But are there any other nuances, themes, or ideas that you were able to explore through this genre that you couldn't through horror, that maybe horror couldn't or wouldn't facilitate?
Well, I think, I don't like to think about genre too much when I write. I just try to write a good novel. And I think that the genre is good for booksellers, honestly. People have called me a horror writer. They've called me all kinds of, I don't write horror. I don't know. I happen to write, I guess, I think life is mysterious. Life is a mystery, so my work tends to be mysterious because I think people are mysterious. I could look out at all of you and I see a bit of mystery in all of you, because we all have things, we're all thinking about different things all the time, and we're all constantly evolving and changing as human beings. And that's so interesting. So in terms of genre, I think I do tend to, as I said, build a novel with this architecture of a thriller, because I think as we need in this time period, for whatever reason, we need to have a thread pulling us through in order, we're so busy. And there's so many other things to do. We can be watching Netflix, for God's sakes, you know, I mean, but so there is the sense that you want to keep people engaged in the work. And so a thriller narrative tends to facilitate that very, very well. But as I said, in All Things Cease to Appear, which happens to be about a novel that, a murder that happened 30 years ago, that was an open case for a long time. I never think of myself as being the kind of writer who would write about an axe murder. It's just not something that I would ever really want to write about. But in this case, I was much more interested in the victim, the woman who was murdered, and her situation and her marriage, and sort of all of the landmarks in our world that situate us in society, and our genuine, you know, what we feel that we have to accomplish, certain things that we supposedly give our lives meaning, and they do in many cases. Marriage, children, a good career, these sort of markers of stability. I'm interested in looking at those and with a very close lens through the eyes of my characters to see what's really there. So that's where the mystery comes in. You know, behavior is mysterious. Why people do things that they do. What they say maybe doesn't necessarily follow what they mean. So I'm interested in people, basically. I mean, that's my genre. People are my genre.
Is that one of the reasons why in Vanishing Point we have multiple focalizing characters?
Yeah, I was interested. I love the idea, this Rashomon idea of looking at one event through various points of view. I think that's really interesting. It might have something to do with my film background, which I started out in wanting to make films and still do. But when I was in college, it was, you know, it's always been tough to get films made. And so, but I was fascinated with movies and storytelling as a visual medium. And I began as a poet. Actually, I was 16. I started writing poetry. I loved language. And I was really interested in photography also. And then I segued into film and writing scripts, and went to LA to the American Film Institute, which was very interesting time. I was very young. I was only 23 at the time, but I was really very, very eager to understand the medium, and I learned a lot. And then my life changed, and I ended up getting married. I ended up moving to Israel for a year with my husband, who was much more interested in his cadaver than in me at the time. So I decided to go to graduate school. I went to Iowa, and that was really interesting. I decided that it would be so nice to be able to just control my storytelling on a page instead of having to pull together a whole mass of people, which is wonderful too, but difficult. And for as a woman, it was more difficult, I think, at the time. So I wrote fiction. I started writing fiction. And because I had been trained as a screenwriter, I think, I always was conscious of this idea of telling a story that gets people engaged so that they have to read it to the end. And that was kind of a skill I think I tried to develop. And it became very useful. When I got out to Iowa, I'm telling a really long story. I got out to Iowa, you know, a lot of serious writers in black turtlenecks smoking non-filtered cigarettes and drinking whiskey. And that was great until a week into it, I discovered I was pregnant. So that all had to end. And so that daughter is 32 now. My other daughter's here today as well. And I have a son too. But so I think that for me, writing has always been front and center, but I've had a lot of other plates in the air all the time, and which has been great. And on the one hand, it really fueled my work, but on the other hand, it was I couldn't really indulge in it as much, and that's good, I think, in a way. That was a good thing. So it's taken me a long time. It's been a long road, but still on it. Still on it. I got worn shoes, but hey, I'm still here.
A good road, and they are fabulous
Yes,
shoes. Yeah. So you talked a little bit about your education in your last answer. Many of your characters are also students. Many others are educators. Many think about going back to school and changing careers. College and art school, including this photography workshop that brought together the characters in Vanishing Point, seem often to act as instigators in your novels, creating situations and connections, discoveries, anxieties, love, hate, envy, all the good stuff. But in all ways, it's always an important aspect of your work. Can you speak for a moment about the role of education in your novels and how it functions for your characters?
Yeah, I love that question. I think education is so incredibly vital, obviously. My father always said that, he would always pay for education. Education was the most important thing. That's sort of how I was raised. And we encourage our kids and, anyone to continue to learn, never stop learning. I mean, even if there's something you're interested in learning how to weave, for God's sakes, go and take a class or something. You want to learn how to throw a pot, go and learn it, because life is so short and there's just so much to know. You can never really know enough. I sound like a spokeswoman for Hampshire College, where I went, and their whole theory is to know is not enough. It's like ingrained in me. But so yeah, I think that education is interesting. It's an opportunity to reflect and think about yourself when you're a student. And so I guess it is, and it is sort of prevalent in the work. But
I have that the more you know rainbow from the 80s.
The more you know.
Yeah.
Yes, that's good.
I'm sure I'm not the only one. Well, speaking of education, you did a significant amount of research into photography for this novel. Is there anything you learned that truly astonished you? You were genuinely surprised to learn?
I tell you, I was astonished by the work of so many photographers. Just remember Diane Arbus. I mean, just her work and her courage, for example, was astonishing, to use that great word. I really researched a lot of photographers, their work. I would really look at it and really reflect on it, what it was saying about who we are. Just there's so many that I absolutely love. I mean, Walker Evans, Paul Strand. I read a lot about Annie Leibovitz, her career, because I based the character of Rye Adler sort of on her career. And she's just phenomenal. I read a lot of Susan Sontag. I thought her work was, amazing. And there's so many. John Sarkowski, who the original title for the book was A Discrete Parcel of Time, which came from his, how he talked about how he saw photography as, just a moment that is captured. And just kind of really thinking about the moments that make up our lives. A photographer captures these moments, and then they're dead, they're gone forever. We don't often think about that 5 minutes ago is gone. We can't get it back. It's too hard maybe to really reckon with that, but it's very interesting. So looking at photographs is a way to kind of contemplate just life and people and how wonderful we all are. We're all so different and so complicated, So.
Yeah, it's so interesting to hear you talk about the moment past, because this novel shows us at least one character constantly trying to recapture that moment, of that one photograph, that perfect moment with the woman he loves encapsulated on film.
Yes, yeah. That's true. And constantly, when you look at pictures that from the past or from a trip you might have gone on and you loved, or it brings you back to that day, that moment, the smells or whatever. So I use that a lot in the novel to help deepen the moments for the characters. Hopefully that was successful. We don't know.
And what are some of the other ways that what you learned through your research shows up in the book? We have quotes from theorists. You mentioned Annie Leibovitz influencing your conception of Rye's career. Were there any other specific photographers or anything else you learned in your research?
Well, I think, I think the use of photography really was wonderful in terms of structuring the novel and the changes the characters are going through. So I I used it as thematically, kind of as a way to bring the reader through this whole experience. But I wouldn't say, I think it would be great if when you're reading the novel, if you look up some of the photographs that are mentioned, because it kind of gives a kind of context to what's going on at the time of the book. It's great to just look at photographs. It's such a great medium. And I spent a lot of time taking pictures to try to get a sense of how the characters see, and asking the question often in my mind as the author, like, what do we really see? And what does that look like? And how does it affect us, what we see every day, And so when I started writing the novel, I would see a lot of kids hanging out on the Everett Road exit ramp with signs. I thought, who are these kids? What are they doing? And that's sort of how I began to write the novel, and how I found the character of Theo, who is a SUNY student, actually, who unfortunately starts doing drugs, and where that takes him and what that experience is like for him. So the photographs kind of motivated when I was sort of looking like a photographer, seeing the world around me, and I'm seeing these kids, and then thinking about that in relation to the book. So that's sort of how it all evolved.
Great. Yeah. Hopefully, if there are any students in the room, they're having a better experience than Theo did.
I know. I felt bad. I really felt badly to use SUNY, but it's such a great big school right in the center of Albany. So it fit my plot very well. So forgive me.
On a gray, rainy day, it does have that tone of the scenes that you're walking across.
I take certain liberties with that.
I know you weren't even in the tunnels in that novel.
I know.
So what's next for your education? The next thing you're going to research that we're going to see show up in your novels?
That's a good question. I'm trying to figure that out. Right now, I'm not. I was thinking about writing about setting something in now and in the future, and then in the 19th century. But I'm working on that. I usually think in terms of when I work, it starts out kind of like a big circle, where I'm thinking about a lot of different things I'd like to explore. And then it gets smaller and smaller and smaller over time, the more I kind of narrow it down and find the people I want to write about. So that's, if that helps.
And speaking of Theo, I do want to sort of end my questions before we open it up to the audience with him. He suffered greatly due to an addiction, but was able to find strength in his family to help him find a happier and healthier space in which to live. This is another element of the novel that you researched to make sure that you were conveying his story in a way that was satisfying. Is there anything you learned that you want to share with the audience that might help them in their suffering or help them with someone else in theirs?
Yeah, I love that question. Theo suffers from addiction. He gets involved in using heroin. And I think that there's a lot of addiction in the novel, not just drugs. There's other kinds of addiction. We all have addictions. We're all addicted to certain things. whether we realize it or not. I think that's a part of life. I think so much in the world and in the media, we're sort of, there's this sense of doom and, if you get addicted to something, you're never going to get over it. It's going to ruin your life. And I just think that's ridiculous. I think, people go through things. It's like, you take a break from your regular life and you go in this one direction and you're captured there for a bit. And then you come out of it and you learn from it and you're different and you move on. So I think that would be sort of my message, that, sometimes we find ourselves trapped in a place where we didn't think we were going to end up. And I think that can happen in anything. I have a friend who right now I think has become a gambler and she can't stop. You find yourself in that and there you are. And it affects your life and it brings about a lot of changes that maybe you were trying to make those changes anyway. And you had to go about it in this way, But I do believe that people move on and you change your life. It's important to know that you can change and find yourself again and again and again over the course of a life. We don't stay the same. We're different, constantly changing. And that's a beautiful thing. That's a wonderful thing. Even if we have to go in a deep, dark direction at some point. Everyone goes into a dark place now and then. I'm interested in writing about people who do that. In this book, Julian goes into a dark place. He can't quite get over his jealousy isn't really the right word, but he has envy for this guy, Rye Adler. He feels like Rye had it easier than he did, and Rye became a famous photographer and he didn't. And his wife loves Rye more than she loves him. And so there are all these sort of kind of things that trouble him about this one guy, Rye, and he becomes obsessive about it. And so that's sort of the noir thriller aspect. That's the genre aspect of it, but not really, because it's so just human. It's when a feeling becomes too big and you can't control it anymore. And so it takes you to a place you never thought you'd be. In this case, it takes Julian into a level of crime that he never imagined he'd experience. I think that's interesting. And certainly it's not all that unusual when you look at what happens in the world and some of the people who have been doing things they shouldn't be doing. We all know who those people are. And, they find themselves involved in a bad, series of events that lead to something terrible. I'm interested in my work in leads to, what one thing leads to another, and how that happens and what it looks like, and how a problem for characters can become overwhelming and take them into a new place that they never imagined they'd be. It could happen to anybody, any one of us in this room. Something can happen and it brings about a kind of change. And that's what I'm interested in as a novelist. One of the things I'm really interested in.
Yeah, speaking of change, photography is very much an interplay between light and dark. Yes. We see each character go from places of light into places of dark and back into places of light, new places they haven't been yet, except Julian. We quite literally leave him in the dark.
Yes, we do.
Yeah.
Or Julian.
Sorry for the spoilers. But it's so fascinating, that element of change and that character who resists it versus other characters who much more easily take to the very concept. Yes. And maybe, I know for Theo, it's much easier to do so because of the strength of those around him.
Yes, that's true.
Their willingness to change.
I think that was also an important message. That's, a lot of times, especially with addiction, I think people fear it so much that they're afraid to even go near it, with who the loved one is. I think people are afraid. And so they step back and, trust other people, strangers, to take care of certain problems. And I think in some ways that's good, but a good thing if it works for you. But I think we all have to get our hands a little dirtier in this world, to use that expression, and to really be honest, really look at something very carefully, and think about how to make a positive change instead of go deeper into that darkness and negativity and fear, which does nobody any good, So I think that's something to think about in terms of addiction.
Great. Well, I have so many more questions and so much more I want to say, but
we're just getting warmed up. When I first sat down, I have to admit, I was pretty nervous.
Oh, I've been nervous all day.
But I'm better now because it's been quite a lineup all day of really interesting conversations. So
yeah,
it's a privilege to be here.
It is, and I'd love to hear some of the questions from these wonderful people who have been speaking and reading and talking to us all day.
Yeah, please feel free to anything. Yes.
This may be too specific, but you have 3 characters in that book. Did you kind of conceptualize one of them and then come up with the others to counteract?
So for those,
That's a good question.
For those who can't hear in the back, the question is, of the 3 characters, what was the method of writing? And correct me if I'm getting this wrong. Did you come up with one of them and then develop the others in response or around that one character?
It's a great question, and I wrote it a long time ago. I'm trying to remember. I think I was really, I think the image of these 2 kids standing on the side of the road with the sign and getting an Instagram image was the first image I kind of had. And I wondered who these kids were. And then I thought about Ry Adler, and I wanted to write about a character like him who is sort of at the top of his game, but questioning everything and wants to kind of go back to a pure state of artistry in his work that he had when he was first starting out. What happens when also, I think in all the arts, you start out and everything is kind of fresh and pure and new, and you're not editing it, and it's raw in a sense. And then as you go on and you end up getting paid for your work or whatever, you start to edit so much, think about, well, how will other people react? And you're censoring yourself in a certain way. I try not to do that, and I always want to try new things, and I do really work at that. If you look at the books I've written, they have similarities, but I'm trying to be more and more kind of experimental. So I started with Ry Adler, I would say, this photographer. I was interested in that because I discovered that my biological father was a photographer. And then I found his work, and I was like so fascinated by how he saw. And that made me kind of question how I see. And then I thought, well, how do I see? What is my vision? And does my work really reflect my vision? I started asking those questions. And then, so I started looking more and more at photography and becoming fascinated with photography. And I took a class online with Main Media, a terrific resource for education. And it made me start to think more about my own particular situation, my own world that I had built, and, reflecting on that. So it's so interesting, isn't it? Life is really interesting. It really is. You never want to stop being interested and fascinated in it, And so I think that writing for me is my way of sharing that devotion to us as human beings and who we are and what we're doing here. That's important.
I think you'll find a lot of writers and readers in the room who could not agree more.
Yes, thank goodness.
yes,
That's good.
we're in good
I
company.
think that's good. Yeah, definitely. Absolutely.
Oh.
You.
Yes, no problem.
Hi, Charlotte.
While I was reading the section about addiction, it kept running through my mind, how did she learn about all of this? And the depth with which you really were able to put it in print.
I'll tell
And
you.
And I wonder, did you go to the people at Everett Road and talk to them? Or did you talk to
Occasionally
the
I did.
psychiatrist or-
I did occasionally talk to them. Not as much as I would have liked, and I'd really love to photograph them too, but I never did. But well, I grew up in New Jersey, and as I said, I was adopted. I love my parents are amazing. I totally love them. It was a good situation for me. But my brother, who we're not blood related, had trouble from the very beginning in his life. And, he was in a foster home for a couple of months before my parents got him. He's older than me. And he was always having difficulty. And he discovered heroin when he was about 13, really young. It was the 70s, and there was a lot of heroin around New Jersey, Newark. It was coming into Newark Airport. And so he got swept up in that. And so that's really, seeing that, I think, was tough at a young age. And with me trying to figure out, always knowing I was adopted, but I think that kind of informed my curiosity about people and wondering about that, and sort of where I fit in at all times. And it was an interesting place to grow up. It was near, my father worked in Newark, and I would see, we would drive into the city, and there was a lot of I knew racism was like a neon sign, and a lot of poor people, and it didn't seem fair to me. And I think so a lot of social issues from a young age bothered me, and I wanted to explore that. And then having my brother Richard, it just was really never could really let go of it. He had a really hard time. So I think that was part of it. I always wanted, and then discovering my biological father was a photographer. All these things kind of happened at once, and sort of reckoning with those things for me in my life at that particular time came into this story. It's so weird because people think you're writing an are you writing an autobiographical novel? And in our times, you have to live it in order to write about it. It's a little bit crazy, but I don't believe in that. I think we're fiction writers. We can write whatever, we should be able to write whatever we want. It's tricky now. It's a tough time to do that. But so I think the authenticity that you mentioned, and I appreciate it, comes from being very young and seeing somebody out of control. Thank you for asking.
Over here.
About the book that became a Netflix movie, how did it happen that book was chosen for Netflix? And did you write the screenplay?
Okay, thank you for asking that. No, I did not. I had nothing to do with it, unfortunately. I wish I had, because I think
So you were disappointed?
I am disappointed. I love the filmmakers. I think they were brilliantly talented, but I don't think that they. I'll tell you a lot of things. What the problem was, this was All Things Cease to Appear, and that's the one about the murder of this woman. And incidentally, the husband 30 years later has now been he's not convicted, but he was set to go to trial this July. I don't know what happened because of COVID, but I think it was delayed. But this couple who, the filmmakers, Robert Pulcini and Shari Springer Berman, they're really talented. And they had read the novel and they sent me an email. And it turned out they lived in Chatham, where the book is set. This town is called Chosen in the novel, but they lived in Chatham and they liked how it had been captured in the book. And they were thinking, would I be open to turning it into a movie? Of course, yes. So they gave me a little bit of money up front and went off to do their thing. They wanted to write it. And so 18 months later, I get a call from my agent. She said, sit down. I said, I'm driving. She said, pull over. And I said, what's up? She said, Amanda Seyfried is going to star in the movie version of All Things. And so, of course, we all became very, very excited about that, and the cast and great actors, and they were going to shoot right around here and in Millerton, all that. But it doesn't, you can have all the ingredients, but it doesn't mean the movie's going to work. And I think everybody learned that lesson, and I just, they had to write a horror film because that's what Netflix wanted in order to get the money. So it's complicated. It's a lot of different, dominoes standing up have to fit together in a certain way so that, it can all come to fruition. And that's what happened. But there are good things about the movie, certainly, but it's really not the book. So thank you for asking that. Appreciate it. I think we had a question over here. Anybody?
In the glasses.
Hi, Elizabeth, I love all your work, and
Thank you.
I
I paid her to say that. So.
My question for you is, how has your work evolved from your first novel now to The Vanishing Point, and how is your process, your writing,
Thank you for asking that. That's great. A great question, because I like to see I like to evolve. I'm hoping that I've evolved. My first novel was The Doctor's Wife, and I wrote that. I sold it in 2000, and it came out. 2002, I guess, and came out in 2004 as my first novel. I was 40 years old. I was late to it, even though I had gone to graduate school many years earlier. I was busy. I had 3 kids. I was busy, and I always taught. But so The Doctor's Wife, I just thought writing a book that revolved around the abortion issue would be a good idea. It turned out it was not such a good idea, for a novelist at that time, 2004. Bush administration came into being, and there was a lot of anti-choice rhetoric going in the world at that time. Not that the novel is really that fierce. It's not a polemical novel. It was just, I thought, a good thriller, and it really came out of my film training. So it was a place to start. And I was published by Viking. I had a very strong editor there, and she championed being controversial. She was okay with it, but I don't think it took me a while to find out what I wanted to do, And so then I wrote my second book, Somebody Else's Daughter, which is not my favorite. I felt like I was rushed and kind of being pushed into this direction to write women's thrillers. It just wasn't, I really expected much more of myself. And I was always interested in language, and I went to Iowa, and I consider myself to have literary aspirations, but I could also tell a story. So it was complicated for me to really understand what I was trying to do on the page. And so then I was teaching at Skidmore, actually, and I was listening to myself tell my students to really slow down, to focus, to to write better characters, to develop your characters. It should be really all about the character instead of the narrative, the plot, so to speak. And I decided I would try to do that. And I wrote A Stranger Like You, and it didn't sell very well, unfortunately. So I learned something from that also. I like that book. I'm proud of that book. It's very feminist, very different than anything else I wrote. And then I found my way to All Things Cease to Appear, and I thought the writing was better. And I was with a new publisher by then, and I had a much better editor. And then, unfortunately, that editor was Me Too'd, and he left. And then I had this new book, The Vanishing Point, that I wanted to sell. And I really felt that it was my best work. I really feel it's much, much better than the other novels in terms of from a writing standpoint, you know. And it takes time. Writing is hard. It's really hard to understand what it is, you know, and how important each sentence is. It takes time. And so I felt that I had really achieved something new with this novel, you know. And I sold it to Little Brown, and I'm working with a great editor there as well. And you learn different things along the way. You know, you really evolve. You change, the work change. It doesn't have to stay the same. How many writers are in the audience, by the way? How many people are trying to write? Look at that. That's great. Wonderful. You know, so many times, I know we have a very big writer in the audience sitting there. Bill Kennedy is here. I'm honored that he's here. I'm sure, I know I'm not teaching him anything he doesn't already know 100 million times over. But, oh, we're going to have to discuss those notes. I'm going to give you a test. I expect an A. Yes. But anyway, so thank you for asking that question, because I don't see any novel as I'm not writing in a formula. I want to keep writing interesting, different things and keep moving forward. And that takes, some of them are better than others, and you have to keep experimenting, and we're artists, and that's what we do. And it's unfortunate because it's a business, and that comes into, that complicates matters when you're trying to really experiment. So.
Elizabeth Brundage.
If you appreciate our programming and would like to support the Writers Institute, you can find out how at nyswritersinstitute.org.